Okay. Well, welcome to today's topic, which is going to be nutrition and injury recovery. I think that all of us are going to find this to be very helpful, especially because we're out there doing those fun, adventurous, semi-dangerous things. So we're going to find that maybe there's times that we get injured, and we want to find the best way to heal, right? And so nutrition plays a big part of that. As I said, injuries prevent us from doing the things that we absolutely love, like climbing, right? So an injury, depending on how long it takes to heal, could take us out for a whole season or just a portion of that season. So we really want to get to, we really want to pay attention to what we're eating. Now, of course, we want to pay attention to what we're eating even before we get out there, right? So the athlete can heal faster because usually they're in good shape. So we want to not only be in good shape muscle-wise and physical-wise, but on the inside as well. So let's talk about what happens to injury, right? When somebody gets injured, it's not just they have a broken bone or a cut or a wound. All kinds of different things happen. Their stress level increases. Some people have to get surgery or medical procedures. Most of us are going to move from being very active, which is really good for the digestive system, to being a very sedentary lifestyle. Some of us begin a regime of antibiotics, which does a number on our digestive system. Not only that, but the medications that we take. A lot of the medications that people take to heal, or not to heal, but to manage their pain when they're injured, ends up being the same medication that slows down the digestive tract, right? And causes them just to be more sedentary. So there's a lot of things that are happening that are causing us to be less at our optimal physical shape. We're less likely to put effort into preparing food. Our sleep is affected, and of course our energy needs increase. Now, I work at a clinic, and at the clinic I work, they have people who have chronic disease, chronic pain. And their chronic pain patients, it started with an injury. And the injury was a one-time event that never seemed to heal properly. So we're talking about, I see people that have 15 years after an injury are still having problems with it, still problem with acute pain. So, how did they get to that point? And by the time we see them, they are really, really out of shape. And so to get them back into a better shape, we have to, we have to really work with them on all kinds of levels. So when we have an injury, or let's say we never have one, but we hope we never will have one, but if we have an injury, we want to know the best foods to eat so that we can quickly recover and get back to the things that we love. All right. So life can feel really out of control when an injury takes place. Just normal things to do once you have an injury become a horrible task to do, or a real hard task to do. So, I want to find a way, or I want to help you to see that eating foods or eating nutritional foods can actually boost the healing process and help it. So let's talk a little bit about that there is hope, but let's talk a little bit about what the healing process looks like. So I believe that you at home can see this, and I'm going to point to you here what I'm talking about. But there are 4 stages of the healing process, and each stage is going to have a different set of goals that it has to accomplish, right? So this is just a wound here. And I want you, I kind of use analogies to help people understand things. But when you first have a wound, I want you to think about that the police, the red blood cells, and the red blood cells go to that wound, right? And so you have this blood flow. And so we call that hemostasis. And that's the police arriving on the scene, right? The second stage is that area gets inflamed. I want you to think of the police as kind of closing off the wound in a way, sometimes with scab or sometimes just with the excess thickness of the inflammation, and then allowing the opening of the blood vessels to allow the white blood cells and other types of cells that are going to be a little bit thicker, right? And a little bit, they're going to cause the inflammation. So that inflammation is actually these other cells coming into the place to start the taking away debris, killing bacteria, that kind of thing. The proliferative stage is where they're going to start to have a kind of a scaffolding, if you will, where that's going to start to the beginnings of healing, and then the remodeling stage takes place well after we don't even have maybe just a slight wound on the top, right? So each one of these areas has different types of cells, different types of crews, if you will, and it needs different types of materials as far as nutritional standpoint comes, or we're talking about. All right. So looking at the body actually needs construction materials, which is the nutrients, the minerals that I'll be talking about in a second, and it also needs crew. The crew is, think about the immune system and the bacteria that's in our body as the crew, right? And there's a wonderful balance that's taking place when we eat nutritive foods. When we feed one type of crew member more so than another type of crew member, it can get us stuck at a stage. So let me go back to this real quick. We don't want to get stuck at this inflammatory stage where all the crew members that are well fed are the ones that are for our inflammatory response. In the people that I see at my, or not my clinic, but the place I work, what ends up happening is these people get stuck here. They're stuck at the inflammation stage, and inflammation just keeps putting that pressure on the different nerves around that surrounding area. Not only that, we're not supposed to be stayed inflamed. That flame response that is staying is also taxing our immune system. So when we're eating nutritional foods, we want to have foods that are going to get us through, the timing is very important, get us through these stages and to feed the particular crew that are working at those particular stages in the most nutritious fashion. All right, so there's that bone break. So nutrition gives the body the materials, the construction materials, but it also feeds the crew. And the crew, again, are these bacteria and microbiome and the immune system and the T cells and the B cells, and I mean, that's way too much. I don't want to get into all that. But these are the crews that are working to help us to heal. So I'm going to talk about the best foods for us to eat, and then I'm going to tell you why, okay? All right, so one of the things that we're going to need, or the types of foods we're going to need foods that have the minerals, right? So I want you to think about minerals as being catalysts in some areas and building blocks in others, and our body is just filled with that, right? So we need to have, when we have a broken bone or some kind of wound, we need to have more minerals coming in. Now go back to biology, go back to your science classes in high school or in college, and remember that all the elements that we find in our bodies and in the foods that we eat come from the soil, right? Somewhere from the soil. So we're going to need to have foods that are able to take the minerals from the soil and put it into their bodies. We also need the vitamins, and specifically vitamin C, vitamin K, and vitamin D. I'm sure they're all involved, but these are the ones that keep coming up as the most important. Essential fatty acids, we talk about fats. There are all kinds of different fats, and again, this is a whole nother seminar, different types of fats, but the essential fatty acids are essentially, they come from plant sources, and they're flexible fats that when the body says, hey, I want to take you down and make you into something else, these essential fatty acids are open to that. Other types of fats are more, for example, like saturated fat. Saturated fat is not open to being broken down as easily in the body. So when we want to heal, we want to have a fat that's not going to keep circulating and make our triglycerides high. We want a fat that is going to be able to be broken down and then reused in the body. So the essential fatty acids also have that anti-inflammatory omega-3 fatty acid in them. And all essential fatty acids come from plants, okay? All right, we have fiber that is important, and fiber I want you to think about as being able to take the bad guys, like the infections and bad bacteria and the possibility of toxins that have gotten into the body. The fiber is both soluble and insoluble, are going to be able to get those toxins out. Now, even if we have a wonderfully healthy body, every day we need to get rid of those toxins. And when we eat fibers, both soluble and insoluble fiber, they get rid of the toxins. Now think about when you have an injury, your stress levels go off the charts, right? And so when your stress levels go off the charts, you also have these chemicals that are meant to be used. Now they are used when you run, your fight or flight mode, right? The stress response, the fight or flight. When you don't fight or flight and you're in a sedentary situation, these toxins, these chemicals that were supposed to be used, they start storing up in the body and they cause the toxins to get higher up in our body. So it's really important that we eat fiber. Antioxidants, I want you to think of antioxidants as all the different colors that we see in the vegetables and fruits. And each color represents something different that it does in the body. So when we eat the colors of the rainbow, when you hear that people say, eat the colors of the rainbow, the yellows and the peppers and reds and the tomatoes and the blues and blueberries, all these antioxidants, they have the different colors represent different properties that they have. So we want a whole bunch. Why? Because we've just been hurt and we have a higher chances of being oxidized or having toxins and things getting into our body that really need to be, again, taken out and fought. Finally, overall, we're going to need an increase of energy. And a lot of people point to just protein. Yeah, we're going to need protein. And everybody seems to understand at some level that protein is the building block of all living cells. And this is true. However, protein needs a certain level of carbohydrates and fats to work properly. So I want you to think about food, especially the macronutrients, the protein, carbohydrates, and fats. I want you to think of them as eating them in symphony, right? We can't isolate and say, well, I'm just going to have this or I'm just going to have that, but to eat it in foods that have a symphony and a nice balance of them. So these are the foods that we want. These are the things that we want in our foods. Now, I'm going to talk about packaging, and I'm going to talk about how packaging of these foods, or we have to be careful. We want to have foods that have these things in it, but we want to also have foods that don't bring into the body stuff that taxes our immune system, causes more bacteria growth, or causes more inflammation. So I want to talk about those items now. So when I talk about the packaging, protein comes in a package. It comes in a plant package or an animal package. We have antioxidants that come in a package of different types of plants. The avocado is a different type of antioxidants that are going to come in that as opposed to maybe strawberries. So they come in packaging. So we want to have our food with the highest amount of minerals and vitamins with the least amount of harmful packaging. So I hope you can catch that analogy. The harmful packaging is going to be the foods that contain fats that prolong inflammation. So the inflammation response that I talked about, let's go back to that. We want to get into this area shortly after we get hurt and the blood stops and we have a scab or whatever. We want to get out of this area and not end up staying for years and days and months, right? So in order to do that, we need to have the crew not only have what they need, but the right kind of crew. So we have, in this stage, we have the white blood cells that are the red blood cells that are opening up those blood vessels to allow the white blood cells and these things called macrophages and all kinds of monocytes and all kinds of things that are, I don't want to go deeply into it, but they're letting that into that area. And after a particular amount of time, They need to change from being inflammation makers into something that is going to actually start scaffolding. Okay, so the beginning of the construction. And if that doesn't take place, and if this inflammation continues to stay like that, you have a particular issue there where you can go into chronic pain and things not healing the way they're supposed to. Same thing with these other stages. If things don't end up healing, if we don't end up going through these stages the way we're supposed to, and reconstruction or construction takes place, we end up not getting better and not getting back to those sports that we want and love so much. Same thing with the bones. Like I said, I work with people who they've had one event of an injury, and now we're seeing them 15 years later. They are totally out of shape. They have digestive problems from the medications that they've been on. They have a kind of like a new types of I don't want to say disease, but new symptoms that have occurred because they started off with this medication. That medication did something to their digestive system. They had to have another kind of medication, but that medication affected their headaches. You know, I mean, all kinds of different things that has happened. So we want to find a way. Is there a way that I can give my body what it needs to heal and not just mask that pain, or not just, you know, take care of the body at just one stage, but throughout the stages? So let's go back to here. So again, we want foods that are going to contain this. And when you really look at this, almost all our foods are going to have that. No matter what you eat, you're going to have it. Even now, our snack bars and candy bars, they're starting to add things to it. You know, antioxidants high as, you know, blueberries or whatever. And they're starting to do that even to our what I call processed foods. What's a processed food? It's a food that has been so processed. It usually comes into a package, and it doesn't look anything like what it started off with. Like, for example, Fruit Loops, right? Fruit Loops started off with some type of grain, right? And then they colored it and they took all the good stuff out of it, and it looks nothing like where it comes from. So we call Fruit Loops a cereal, but it doesn't look anything like cereal. So that's a highly processed food. Some of our white breads and our white rices and our pastas, highly processed food. What do I mean by that? Well, the wonderful fibrous background, the shell of the wonderful grains that we're eating are chucked. The germ is chucked, and all that's left is something that is metabolized just like sugar in the body. So a lot of times when we're eating these highly processed food, I call them food-like foods, we're really not getting the nutrients from it. So we want to have foods that have these things in it without having those side effects that I just started talking about, without being so beyond food, so stripped of all its nutrients that it literally takes more for the body to work on, and less it gets less nutrients from it. For example, let's take pasta. You see that we have, if you looked on the back of a pasta box, it says enriched flour, right? Why do they have to enrich that flour? Because they took that wonderful germ, took the bran out of it, took the germ out of it, and what they left with, or what they ended up doing, was really like they bleached it, all kinds of different things that they did to it, and what is left is like a powder. As you know, like flour, it's just like left with like a powder with really no nutrients at all. I had read some articles that said that 20 of the nutrients are left out and only 5 are enriched back in. So anytime you see enriched, instant, you know that they have done something to that food, and so that food is not as nutritive as it was before. So when we're talking about packaging, we want to have the types of fats. We want the food that we're eating to be whole and how do I say, not so stripped of all the good things that are in it. So we want to have foods that contain fats We do not want to have foods that contain fats that prolong inflammation. So we're looking at, we don't want to have foods that have omega-6 fatty acids. Oh, I know, that's a whole bunch of things to think about. But what I want you to remember is that with the fats, we want to have fats that take down inflammation, and those type of fats are going to come from polyunsaturated fats, and those polyunsaturated fats come from plants. We want to have, we don't want to have harmful packaging. We don't want to have something that contains an overabundance of simple carbohydrates, and that's what I was talking about before. A lot of our granola bars, if you look really close into it, they have this thing called it looks like a puffed rice. It looks like a outside of a rice, and there's nothing inside it, and they use that to make that crunchiness on our granola bars. And a lot of us growing up in that area of granola, we're like, wow, granola, it's like a health food. But when you see some of the ingredients they use, and if you look over on the side of the box, they actually say grain-like crumbles, or they say, you know, wheat crumbles or something like that. And what they've done is they've taken this food so stripped of anything that was really good about it, and then they put it back together in this crunchy mixture of high sugar and high fat, and they put it in a granola mix, and then we're thinking we're doing ourselves some good. So we want to make sure that we're not doing that. So why is the simple carbohydrates a big deal? Well, if you know anything about diabetes, diabetes is a hyperglycemic situation. What happens in hyperglycemia? There's a degradation of proteins. So we're trying to heal, right? And when we're eating those high processed foods like pastas and granola bars and, you know, cookies and white breads and all that kind of stuff, we're actually causing a lot of the protein to not do what it's supposed to be doing. It needs to have those complex carbohydrates, not the simple ones that are metabolized like sugar. We need to have foods that have lots of fiber. So harmful packaging will lack in fiber. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about fiber, but I want you to understand that when you get an injury, your body is already producing in and of itself some of the chemicals that are supposed to be in a small amount, but is producing it in a higher amount, right? You also end up taking in medications, you end up taking in antibiotics, your good bacteria gets wiped away along with the bad bacteria, and what ends up happening is that body really needs to have the ability to, if you will, to go, right? And that's number two, to go, number two, right? And so if we start not moving, when we move, when we exercise, we're kind of like an outwardly moving our digestive system and keeping it working well. When we stop moving because we're injured, we don't have that outward movement. But not only that, inside your intestines, you have muscles, right, that are constantly squeezing and moving food along, you know, in our small intestines and in our large intestines. Excuse me. And when you take those medications that make you feel like, oh, I feel so much better, the pain is gone, so is your digestive system saying the same thing, like, oh, I'm just so relaxed. So you got the double whammy, right? You're not moving, and your digestive system is not moving. So what happens then? Now you have a whole bunch of toxins in your digestive system, and it's not moving out the body. We call that constipation, right? And constipation is like crazy dangerous. You know why? Because our body's like so cool. It ends up retaking any kind of excess water out of the feces. I know it's kind of gross kind of conversation, but we've got to talk about it. So it kind of takes the excess water out of the feces, and whatever's left sticks on the sides of the walls of the colon, right? And guess what? They get to eat away at the colon, and when it eats away at the colon, we have these things called diverticulitis, and we have like all kinds of impactments where your inside of your colon is stuck with things. I know this is going to sound really gross, but I actually watched pictures of colons, you know, good colons contrast with bad colons. oh my gosh, what an eye-opener. I mean, if you have the stomach for it, go ahead and check out something like that. I mean, it really is, it's fascinating. I mean, there are literal holes inside the colon. And you can see that. And the good news is that you start to eat stuff like things that contain fiber, and you start to heal the colon. So we really want to take care of not just, healing our body, but making sure our digestive system is working well. So we need to have that. We need to have food that have fiber. So foods that lack fiber, we're going to call harmful. We need to balance a protein. A lot of times what people say is, oh, I need protein. And again, instead of thinking about the symphony of food, they think of all I need is protein. And they start to isolate that. What do they have? They have protein bars and protein shakes and all these different things. The problem with that is that the body has to have a symphony of things. It needs all kinds of things to break down and to digest food well. So when we have too much protein, we also have too much nitrogen group. And that nitrogen group has to come out the body. You know how it comes out the body? Take a guess. I'll tell you, because you might not be able to guess. It comes out your urine, right? So what is this? How do you know when you've had too much protein? Well, some people know because they have these things called kidney stones, right? And they have to pass these stones. What happens is the body had to take that nitrogen and encapsulates it with calcium. Where does it get the calcium? From the bones, right? So now you're eating a high protein diet that has a high amount of nitrogen groups to it, right? And the body has to take it out. It ends up stealing from the bones, encapsulating and taking it out the body. So we don't want to take in so much protein till we end up leaching the minerals that we need to rebuild. So that's a real important thing, to make sure we have a balance of food and not to kind of just go zero in on one group of the macronutrients. The next thing I want to talk about, another harmful packaging, are those foods that have allergy compounds or allergen compounds. Probably the number one problem with inflammation, and this is what we see in the patients that I work with, is that they are eating foods that before their body had no problem with. But after the medications, after the being sick for a very long time, after being sedentary, their bodies now have an allergic reaction to normal foods that it used to have. And their allergic reaction, any allergic reaction, it literally tells the immune system, hey, there's a problem here. There's something in the blood that's not supposed to be there. And so what ends up happening is we have more inflammation. So the more foods that we take in that have these allergen compounds, the more likely we're going to stay inflamed. And remember, that's not such a good idea. So let's go back to this first one. We want to have foods that contain minerals. We want to have foods that contain vitamin C, vitamin K, vitamin D. We want the essential fatty acids, because remember, they're going to be anti-inflammatory, omega-3 fatty acids. We want to have fiber, both soluble and insoluble, because that's going to get rid of the toxins. We want antioxidants, or just think of the colors of the rainbow. And we want increased overall calories, and not by much, right? All right. We want to stay away from the foods that have harmful packaging, which are the foods that are going to have fats that don't break down very well in our body. So we're talking about our saturated fats and the fats that prolong inflammation. So a lot of omega-6 fatty acids. There's a whole big deal about omega-3 fatty acids, omega-6 fatty acids, and the balance of them. And that's another lesson in itself. But just for this lesson here, omega-3 fatty acids are the ones that are going to break down and keep away from inflammation. We want to have foods that do not have an overabundance of simple carbohydrates, so we're going to stay away from processed foods and go closer to nature when we eat our foods. We want to have foods that have fibers, so the foods that lack fiber we want to stay away from. We want to have foods that have an appropriate amount of protein. You know, the protein needs for us are from 8, it depends on, the World Health Organization says between 8 and 11%. Human breast milk is 11%. and a couple other go as far as 8 to 12%. But we're talking a very, very small amount of protein that we need. And guess what? Protein is found in everything we eat. So we really never have to worry about that. This whole craze of having a whole bunch of protein really causes our body to have an ill effect from it. High allergen compounds, we want to stay away from those, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that because they start the immune, or they have the immune system going on alert. So what are we looking at here? We're looking at foods that have the ability to take the minerals that are in the ground and put them into their bodies, put them into their roots, their stems, their leaves, their flowers, their seeds, right? So we're talking about one of the ways we're going to find minerals is to increase our vegetables. Vegetables are the only things that we eat that can actually take the minerals, the raw minerals in the soil and put it into their bodies. Now you say, but wait a minute, animal products have that as well. This is true because what do the animals eat? Plants. Right? So they're getting it from there. However, when we eat the animal, we're getting what that animal had a reserve of, right? Not the wonderful freshness of it in our bodies, not the wonderful amounts of it that we would find in plant foods. All right, so one of the first things we want to do is we want to have a food that's going to be able to take in the minerals. So we're looking at vegetables, and look at, I have to say this whole this statement. It says vegetables contain minerals in a fibrous, antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, constipation stopping package, right? They are going to give you the things to go. And exactly. So, and look at all the wonderful colors. So all the colors of the rainbow are represented into our vegetables. So if you were to say, well, Colleen, oh my gosh, all these vegetables, I don't know about all this. Can you give me one vegetable that I can use that is really, just give me one vegetable. I'm going to try to eat it. You guys want to take a guess what I'm going to say? Yeah, exactly, kale. All right, so the dark leafy greens are the kale. The kale is actually a form of the dark leafy greens. When you see dark leafy greens, I want you to remember that all the colors of the rainbow are represented in dark leafy greens. The only reason we can't see that is because there's this substance called chlorophyll, right? And the chlorophyll masks the colors of the rainbow. But my son takes these wonderful plant classes and stuff, and in entomology classes he teaches me things. So he taught me, he said that all the colors of the rainbow are in the leaves next to the chlorophyll, and they're protecting the plant from the harmful rays. Think about it, a plant all day long is like this to the sun. How is it that it doesn't get damaged, right? Because it has all, especially dark leafy greens, they have all the colors of the rainbow, all the antioxidants in there constantly protecting that plant so that it can handle that hot sun. So also cool to learn from my son that our physiology of our bodies are similar to plants in that the antioxidant properties of plants and what they do for the plants is also what it does for our bodies. So, we have these oxidants that we might breathe in or we might take in, and the body, these oxidants like to steal, I know this is getting maybe too far, but let me kind of just get through this. The oxidants like to steal electrons, right? And so on a atomic level, or they like to steal from other cells, right? These antioxidants get in and they give electrons to these cells that are kind of been stealing, right? And so what ends up happening, instead of having a whole bunch of unhappy cells that get together and they're all grumpy and we turn into a tumor and cancer and all that other kind of stuff, these antioxidants come in and they go, shh, relax, take it easy. Here, you can have my electrons. And so then these cancerous substances don't have what they need to start building. They don't get together. There's not too many grumpy cells, if you will. You have to forgive me. This is I teach people who don't have they don't have maybe as much knowledge as you have, and I try to find a way to explain these things on a level to where you've got it, and so you walk away and you go, oh, I get it. You don't have to know the whole chemical thing about antioxidant, what it really does, and all the electron transfer chain and all that happy stuff, but just to have an understanding that antioxidants pretty much give to the body and go, shh, relax. You don't have to have an unhappy cell, and you don't have to gather together in a cancerous format. All right, so going back, so I could go off the subject, we want to have more vegetables. More specifically, we want to have dark leafy greens. All right, Colleen, out of the whole dark leafy green, tell me which one to eat. Yes, absolutely, kale is the number one. You cannot get more fibrous, more dark leafy green than probably this type of kale right here. Wonderful anti-inflammatory properties, incredible amounts of iron and calcium, plus the calcium that we get from this is actually more absorbable than the stuff that's in milk. And we're going to talk about that in a second. It has a wonderful amount of fibers, omega fatty acids. They have this wonderful fatty acid, omega-3 fatty acid, that actually turns into oleic, linoleic, no, I forgot now. Oh, blast, whatever. It turns into that, and when it turns into that, it's like superb and fantastic for the body. When I get nervous, sometimes I forget words. So there it is. So we have vitamin K, vitamin A, and water-soluble vitamins. We also have the polyunsaturated fats, other omega-6 and omega-9s, and we have a wonderful amount of antioxidants. So we're talking powerful food. There's a doctor out there that talks about being a nutrinarian, so looking for nutrients, and he did a whole bunch of food and he scored it. And kale, you know, it's a scale of 1 to 1,000, right? Kale is like 1,000. It has all the things that you actually need. So we're going to talk a little bit later about how to eat it, but this is probably the number one. If you were down and out in an injury, this would be one food that I'd find a way to add to your diet. So people often talk about calcium. Remember, I broke my bone. Now how do I do this? I'm going to have to, that bone needs calcium to heal. Well, remember that calcium is a mineral that's in the ground, right? How do the cows get all that calcium, right? They're eating all the grass, and then they make it into their cow's milk. So part of the deal with eating for an injury, or to heal for an injury, is that you want to have the best sources of calcium without the harmful packaging. So let's look at the two side by side. Both have substantial amount of calcium, but the calcium in kale is 2 times more absorbable. You have in a glass of milk, depending on what kind of milk that you have, it will have some saturated fats and some cholesterol. In the kale, you'll have polyunsaturated fats. In milk, milk is probably the number one allergen that people have a fuss with. It's like across the board, number one in the world allergen is dairy milk. No inflammatory or allergens to kale. You have a high amount of protein. Every time you drink a glass of milk, I want you to think about that you are having a glass of liquid meat. That's the high amount of protein. And many people don't just have a glass of milk and go, okay, I had my meat for the meal. They have a glass of milk, a piece of a steak, some cheese on that steak, right? And and maybe even some dressing that has some kind of cheese or creaminess to it. And so they're overabundance in amount of protein. So remember, milk does have a substantial amount of calcium, but when we're having it with an abundance of protein, that protein, those nitrogen groups, that is going to have to be encapsulated in the minerals to be taken out of the body, right? So we want to make sure that we have a protein amount in our foods that is more like a symphony of food, right? And remember, kale also has protein. Everything we eat has protein in it. Everything that's living has protein in it, so we never have to worry about that. Lastly, a lot of protein can cause an acidic environment. You might have heard about the ketosis diet, ketone diet. So what do they do with that? They actually take people and they put them on a high animal fat and high animal-based diet, and they don't give them any grains, and they put them, so pretty much meat and vegetables. Now, the issue with that, after a while, is that it takes the body and it makes the body go off of carbohydrates. Blah, 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 blah. What's my point? My point is, after a while, they have to come off that diet. Why? Because their body can become very acidic. They can have liver problems. They could have ammonia, influx of ammonia building substances in their body. So it's really not the best diet. We need to make sure that we have plenty of vegetables and even some of the grains. But let me go back to this. We're talking about just injury, not all the other stuff. So the dark leafy greens have lots of calcium in them, and that's what I want to get to, without the harmful packaging. Lastly, the dark leafy greens, especially kale, is going to have that wonderful chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is going to be used for, it's going to give us lots of magnesium. Remember, magnesium and calcium and vitamin D all work together. And we also, it's going to help us with our blood, development of blood. Also going to fight infection. So these dark leafy greens are going to be good on a number of cases, a number of reasons. Oh, and lastly, I'm glad I wrote that. It's going to have all the colors of the rainbow, right? So all the colors of the rainbow are going to be represented, but you're not going to be able to know that because the chlorophyll is going to cover that. Remember, like in fall, how we see the fall colors, how the changing colors of the leaves, those leaves are really that color. It's just that they don't have any chlorophyll anymore hiding those colors. So the colors of the rainbow, all the wonderful antioxidants and all the different colors that those represent are in the dark leafy greens. So what about protein, right? We just started talking about this. But, I want to have, I heard protein is the best. Yes, it is. We do need protein to develop and to build. But remember that we need it in symphony of other things as well. So let's talk about protein, because that's if one question I'm asked so many times when I tell people to increase their vegetables and and lower this or lower that, they get really nervous. But what about protein? What if I don't have enough protein? Protein is in everything that you eat. Absolutely everything you eat. So you don't need to look for that. Plus, our needs are only 8 to 12%, 12 being the high, right? So let's look at some of these things. Everything we eat has protein, both animal and plant sources. They all have protein in it. So let's look at it in the packaging. When we eat an animal product, and again, first I have to tell you this, I'm not telling you to take meat off your table. I'm not telling you that. I'm just telling you that on top of that, you need to keep that meat to a portion size and put a good amount of vegetables on that plate, especially when we're healing. So we can't, this is not a time I'm going to get fast food because I don't feel like doing anything else. This is not a time I'm going to eat my meat and my potatoes because I'm healing. No, this is a time when we need a whole bunch of minerals and all that wonderful stuff in our bodies so that we can develop our heal. So if you look at the two difference here, we have animals similar in calories, but look at the protein here. And this is not, you're probably not just going to have a plate of meat. You're going to have other things on that plate that are going to add to that protein. And look at also the fat, and absolutely no fiber. So when you are taking that medication and that medication's slowing down your system, you're going to need to have fiber. So you can't just have, I'm going to eat whatever I want to eat. We're going to have to add vegetables, and these are going to have to be portioned. Talked about vitamin C. What else is in, where can I find vitamin C? Look at that. Isn't that interesting? A lot of people don't know that dark leafy greens have vitamin C. Same with broccoli. Lots of vitamin C in our fresh vegetables and fruits. Vitamin K. Lots of vitamin K in our fresh vegetables, especially the dark leafy green ones. Vitamin D. Let me talk really quick about this. I have about 5 more minutes. Vitamin D is actually a substance that we call it a vitamin, and we do need it, but it really is in us and it needs to be activated. by the sun. So probably the best thing that we need to do every now and then is to get at least 10-15 minutes out there in the sun without the sunscreen, just for a little while, to activate that vitamin D inside of us and make sure that we have it. So we don't necessarily have to take it in a pill format. We can get some from the sun. All right, let me talk about fiber. 4 minutes, I can do this, right? So, we have injury, which for some people might lead to surgery and recovery, a regime of antibiotics, increased stress, less activity and movement, and less emphasis on the diet, right? These are possible things. This is the type of people I see. They literally have just given up. One lady, she had a arm injury, and she just stopped cooking. And she just stopped taking care of herself, and it got her worse and worse and worse. So we're seeing her, 15 years later. And we really should have saw her right away. We should have got, the people we see, we should have got them in right away. That's why I'm talking about this injury. When you have an injury, it's right away you start to take care of business and eating the foods that your body needs to have so that you don't have to go back and then regain your health and then heal, right? So you have possible outcomes of these things are some stomach issues, constipation, and toxin buildup. So more than ever, you need to have things that are going to help you go. So we need to have fiber. So let's talk about the two different types of fiber. There's soluble and insoluble fiber. I'll give you some hints of where they come. Soluble is going to make this kind of gel-like stuff. If you ever put chia seeds in liquid, you see that the chia seeds become like gel-like. Well, that wonderful gel-like stuff, think of it as oozing around the curves of your colon, taking out any of the stuff that's stuck inside there, right? And think about the insoluble as just pushing it through, right? So we need to have foods with fiber. And we need, so again, so far it looks like plants have the minerals, plants have the fiber. Not to say we can't have any of the other stuff that we want, but I just wanted to show you how we can start to really fortify our foods, fortify our diet by eating the foods that have the most minerals, the most things that we need without the harmful packaging. Here are some sources of soluble and insoluble fiber. So a lot of our flax seeds and our nuts and seeds and stuff will have the seeds like flaxseed and chia seeds will have the soluble. And the insoluble, how do you know you're eating insoluble? Because it'll go in and come out exactly the same. You'll go, hey, I had that apple yesterday. Look, I see those apple peels right there in your product after you went, right? All right, so I talked about kale being like probably the superfood. So it's not the issue of, oh, I know that that's a good superfood. It's how to eat it. I have my own YouTube, and I have some recipes on there that actually show you how to put things together. So if you go to youtube.com and just put Colleen Schemrich into the search box, you'll get, I think I have about 90 different types of recipes. By far, I'm not the only one that's out there. I mean, just put kale in kale recipes and you'll get a gazillion. But remember, we don't want to have kale like dripping with oil. We want to have kale as close to its natural form as possible. And one thing I always get, people always say is like, well, how do I do this? How do I do this? Well, the best way, the easiest way is take your plate, cut it into thirds. Put half of the stuff that I talked about on that plate, and then take your other favorites, your grains and your protein-rich foods, the things that you like, and put it in that part of the plate. Now, don't have a plate that's about this big, right? But, your normal-sized plate, take half of that plate and put those dark leafy greens and wonderful vegetables. If you fill your plate with vegetables, especially the dark leafy greens, they'll contain the nutrients to aid injury recovery, and I did it 7:50 on the dot. All right, so thank you for joining, and yeah, that's it.